Hey there, in the last video of the lifting table I showed you how I made the base frame of it, and now I'll show you how I make the two frames of the scissor. These two frames are basically identical, just the length of the shorter parts is different and of course the anchor point for the hydraulic cylinder. But about these anchor points we'll care later. The interesting pieces of the frames are the longer sides. All these four parts are exactly the same. After I cut the tubing to length, I welded on these little plates to reinforce the sides of the tubing. Over the edges of these holes get transferred a lot of forces. And these are pretty small, so I doubled it up to transfer these much forces over twice as much surface. I first welded on the piece to the tubing, as by drilling them at once they are perfectly aligned. That would be pretty hard by first drilling the hole and then welding it to the tubing. Now I had to mark as precise as possible the center points of the holes. All these four parts need 3 holes. One for the bushing or to weld in the bushing for the hinge to the base or the top frame, one in the middle also to weld in the bushing for the scissor joint, and one at the other end for the axis of the bearings that run along the base or the top frame. There I just welded on these little plates to reinforce the sides. It's not that easy to mark a distance to that round edge of the tubing, so I used a flat piece and the backside of the caliper. And of course I had to center punch the holes. With this mag drill and the little trick for it that I already showed you in the video that you can find in the info box, the drilling of the tubing was pretty straightforward. Where I reinforced the wall by doubling it up, I first drilled halfway through, then had to get rid of the leftover in the middle before I continued with the second half. With these holes, now it was pretty simple to just push the bushings in and weld them in place. And I had to grind down the welds to have a flat surface for the hinge action later on. At the end, where the roller bearings will be, I had to knock off one side of the tubing so that the bearings can roll on the base or the top frame. Where I couldn't reach the sharp edges with the angle grinder, I had to use the good old file. Of course, I also cleaned up the welding surfaces, and the layout and clamping was then the same as with the base frame of the last video. I've just finished welding the second frame for the lifting table. It's the bigger frame of the two of the scissor. So now with the scissor frame on top of the bottom frame, I can get these plates into the right position with these axes, just by sliding these through the frame and the part, and then clamping everything in place and tack it. I temporarily fixed the little plates with tape to the frame, so I had the hands free to set the clamp. The perfect position of the top frame I got with light hits. And of course I couldn't resist testing the hinge action for the first time. So I've just finished welding these hinge parts onto the bottom frame, and now I will flip this over, put it to the ground, and I'll try to mount this frame to that one. That's what's called a tight fit. There was probably some distortion after tacking it by welding it completely. but I managed to get it in the right position with some force.
It's maybe a little bit too tight.
I solved that problem later on by just grinding off a little bit of the plates that I welded to the base frame to give the hinge a little bit more space. And now I had to remake all these steps to get the second frame of the scissor. So the second frame of the scissor is finished, so let's see if it fits. So we need the bearings in here. I first had to slide the axis with one snap ring already attached through one side. Then there comes a spacer and a bearing. The spacer is to keep the distance between the wall of the tubing and the bearing so that the bearing can move freely. And a bigger spacer between the bearings, the bearing and the spacer again. The spacer in the middle is 12mm wide, so later on when there's too much play side to side and the bearings threat to come off the track, I still could add a 10mm square bar in the middle as guidance.
Gorgeous.
And here I'm inserting the spacers between the two scissor frames. At the second side it was hard to get the spacer in, so I opened the gap a little bit with a big wedge. And so far I'm very happy how that turns out. The next and last frame is the top frame. On it the tabletop will lie. It's pretty simple, welded miter joints in the corners and the 4 hinge plates that we've already seen at the base frame.
So the main frame is finished, but there are several things missing. At first the hydraulics, so I don't have to lift it myself. Especially when this heavy steel plate is on top of it, then I absolutely won't be able to move this anywhere. The hydraulic cylinder, the hydraulic pump and the hydraulic oil tank are still missing. The pump and the cylinder I've ordered, they will hopefully arrive tomorrow. The hydraulic tank I'll build my own. But at first I will build the structure the hydraulic cylinder will be mounted to. Let me show this to you. I think this should work. So here you can see the tubing where the cylinder is fixed to at the bottom and also at the top. So this I'll do first. The parts for this I've already cut, they just need to be cleaned up before welding. And this will become the tank for the hydraulic oil, hopefully. So I've cleaned the part, closed the open ends of the tubing and clamped it to the table, hopefully square, so I can weld these 3 parts together. Unfortunately, this piece is too wide to fit in these clamps, so I have to clamp it like this. By the way, this wooden block has the exact same width that I need to mount this hydraulic cylinder.
Just for the safety nerds of you, yes, here I forgot to wear the jacket and yes, I got sunburned for it. Here I cleaned the surfaces that the structure for the hydraulic cylinder will be welded to. As safety backup, I used these clamps so I don't get slain by the lifting table. It was a little bit difficult to get to the lower end with the angle grinder, so I lifted up all 3 frames to clean that surface.
So I've managed to weld this in place, but unfortunately I've ran out of gas, so I couldn't finish all the welds, but for now it's definitely strong enough. So I can already drill the holes for the bearings that will hold the hydraulic cylinder. I don't have the right screws, I don't have gas anymore for welding, so I think I'll call it a day.
And that's it for this episode. In the next one you'll see the hydraulics in action and for the first time lifting the 240 kg heavy steel tabletop. I'm already pretty excited about that. So make sure to not miss the next video and good luck for your projects. Thanks for watching.